Another day, another dollar, another cartoon sitcom, another American family and their wacky hijinks, as the old saying goes. And today's episode is focusing on American Dad, created by previous featurer on this channel, Seth MacFarlane, whose trans-centric narratives on Family Guy left me very much less than impressed. So this is really another chance for him to pull back some points and show off his comedic chops by doing queer comedy without it becoming just a bigoted nightmare of stereotypes and mockery. Now, to be fair though, I would hardly call this a Seth MacFarlane only production, because the other two people involved in creating American Dad had a larger control than he did, specifically Mike Barker from also Family Guy, and Matt Weitzman from also Family Guy. Okay, so maybe it's fair to say that what would distinguish American Dad significantly from Family Guy, namely who is the showrunner, isn't as big of a distinguishment as you might hope, but there is definitely a variation here in the style and the approach to the humour that it uses. While the concept of the family dynamic is very much the same, and the basic setup remains quite similar, American Dad did at least try to have a different style of family, specifically with the insertion of Roger, an alien who often broke the human conceptions on gender, sexuality and presentation by pure virtue of the fact that they were an alien and didn't feel as if such a thing was a requirement for them to abide by. Rather understandably, really. The show also got nominated for a GLAAD Award back in 2007 for Season 3's Episode 4, Lincoln Lover, an episode that featured actual gay people doing the voice acting for gay characters, and also written by Nahnatchka Khan, who quite often puts in queer themes into the stuff that she does. And I will tell you right now, one show that did not even get nominated for a GLAAD Award at all for its entire run, which is Family Guy. Sorry, I'm getting a little lost in the sauce here. What am I trying to say again? Alright, American Dad has far more possibility, so far as we know it, to really break the expected shitty mould of American animated trans episodes. And you might be wondering which Roger-centric thing we're going to be discussing for it today. And the answer is none. That's right. While Roger is very much a gender-bendy all-over-the-place queer icon, I think that choosing to do the alien character, who is honestly far more allowed to get away with that stuff, is almost cheating for the show and its trans rep. And I would much rather judge it upon the human perspective, and focus that really does off-screw comedies over. And so, we will instead be talking about Season 10's Episode 10, LGB Steve, written by Eric Richter, who also created one of my favourite shows of all time, Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law. Yeah, there's a bit of Lily Cannon for you to add to the memory banks on that one. But before we can talk about this episode, first, rejoice and give thanks to whatever god or gods you want to, as today's video is specifically being brought to you by our sponsor, Atlas VPN. That's right. Atlas VPN is a fantastic way to do exactly what I already have to do for these videos, which is to actually watch the darn shows that feature trans representation and not get blocked out by the obnoxious regional locks that all streaming services seem to have these days. Trust me, being in New Zealand means I basically get to watch nothing. Alongside that, Atlas VPN also helps to block the variety of ads and malware that make up seemingly 90% of the internet right now, and keep my data private as well. I really do not want Zuckerberg or Elon Musk knowing that I'm trying to buy more leather jackets, or that I'm constantly refreshing the internet to see when a new patch of Baldur's Gate 3 is going to come out. I want justice for Minfara, alright, and that's my right as a human to want and to not have billionaires find out about. And right now, with the link in the description of this video, you can get all of this and join me in my privacy-free bubble of looking at Baldur's Gate for only $1.83 a month, with 3 months extra, and a 30-day money-back guarantee if it's not what you're looking for. That's a fantastic price, frankly. And I can also speak from personal experience to say that the customer support is a lot more active and speedy than any other online services that I have used in basically ever. So check out the link below, or use this QR code they gave me because the future is now, old man, and protect your data / get the most out of those 50 streaming sites for the cheap, incredibly low price of $1.83 per month with 3 months extra. And with all that said, how about we get back to the analysis that Atlas VPN has funded on a trans episode? You might be initially suspecting that you know how LGB Steve is gonna kinda go. What with how Steve is replacing the T in LGBT. And yeah, that's some rather smart deduction by you. But that only gives you the hint and not the answer of the episode. The actual episode opens on a women's roller derby match between the Langley's Falls Hot Broads and the Chimdale Chickaboons. You might be thinking this is going to turn into some kind of women and men and women's sports thing, and thankfully American Dad pretty much just avoids that conversation. It doesn't even consider it, which is a blessing. A massive, massive blessing. This leads into a bit between Klaus the goldfish and Haley the daughter of the Smith family, the family at the centre of things, and I also just discovered while reading this up that Haley is voiced by Seth MacFarlane's sister, Rachel MacFarlane, and that she got into the industry at almost exactly the same time that he did, and that they worked together on a bunch of shows, like Johnny Bravo, but just like coincidentally worked together, which is... I mean, it's nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's interesting nonetheless. Anyways, Haley and Klaus have a whole bit that revolves around the idea of the Amazonian bond of warrior sisters, and its relation to the sport of roller derby in regards to how they have each other's backs. A bit that I'm sure is going to probably come into play heavily in regards to the overarching theme of this episode.
These women are warriors. They live by the code of the ancient Amazons, a sisterhood who have each other's backs.
Wow.
And, after the intro music and animation, we get Haley approaching one of the members of the team, Iris, who also reminds Haley that she does not respond to gender-specific titles like Miss, while also encouraging Haley to try out for the roller derby team. There's also this whole joke here about sexual orientations and its relation to women doing masculine sports like this. If I'm being honest, a bit of a tired joke, even by the standards of 2015 when this episode aired. Though one could also argue that it is pointing fun at that narrative by its inclusion.
Oh, but can I play if I'm straight?
Straight, huh? Not getting that from you. But sexual orientation, that's your own business.
You're so open-minded.
The old satire defense, which is one of the trickiest things to navigate in comedy that doesn't make it clear when it's satire or when it's just a straight joke. American Dad does that quite a bit. Honestly, a lot of these shows do that, and generally I fall on the side of the satire works until it starts crossing over into territory that isn't funny anymore and is just cruel for cruelty's sake or bigoted without any real punchline at the bigot in question. Right now, though, I would say we're not in that area just yet, but the fear is always present when we go into these episodes blind. And on the note of jokes that I probably just don't understand, in our next scene where Haley introduces the idea that she is going to try out for this team to her family, a family who either doesn't care because they've got other stuff going on, or is supportive, Stan, the dad of the Smiths, folds the poster for the team over and then runs away when he sees what it looks like.
Fold here. Oh, the dark arts!
But am I missing something here? What is it meant to look like? I mean, it kind of looks like a pentagram, maybe, at a stretch? Is it meant to be a pentagram, is what I'm asking here. I don't know if I'm just blind, but I've watched this 3 times over and I still don't get it. So jump into the comments and tell me what it actually is, I guess. Feed me that engagement, but also help. But Haley also invites Steve along to watch the roller derby if he lends her one of his skates. Which brings us to the joke that plays a larger part of Steve in this show. the entirety of the show. A joke centered around Steve's masculinity in relation to what he owns or what he engages in.
Well, you can come watch if you let me borrow a pair.
Inline, roller, or sequined roller? That's a trick question. They're all sequined.
From my time spent watching American Dad a lot when I was younger, this is a quite recurrent bit, and it does fall into that question again between satire and comedy. Though I would argue that oftentimes the end result is that whatever femininity Steve identifies with is never rectified or changed, and that ultimately it does just seem to be part of him that the show never attempts to show as being wrong, but it is still a joke that they point us at as an audience. So we do have to wonder about what we're meant to be thinking with regards to that. Overanalyzing, my true curse, and the reason I can't enjoy anything anymore. And yes, there is a Roger scene where he is dressed as a woman and is apparently the day manager for this skate rink, but for the love of all that is holy, remember, this episode isn't about him. Sure, he is a strange little genderqueer goblin from outer space, but let him be that, and let's focus on these darn humans, alright? Haley sucks at skating, and begs to be allowed in, which Iris is okay with as long as Haley can get her sister to be involved. The sister in question being them misinterpreting Steve as a woman because he looks kind of like some of the other roller derby women.
My sister?
Crisscross applesauce!
Whoa.
Which I think leans into that prior conversation we had about the pointed way in which the show both considers Steve's femininity and also the way that it considers roller derby's participants as masculine lesbians. There's like a real melding of those two ideas here in this episode. Haley gets Steve on board with the idea of pretending to be a girl by appealing to one of the two ways in which every gender bend episode happens on TV. Either they need to swap genders to better understand the opposite sex, or they need to swap genders to be able to pull something off, and it also gets them close to the opposite sex physically. In this case, it's the appeal to him getting to be able to touch women without them being suspicious of his intentions due to him pretending to be a girl, which, now that I've said it out loud, is not a comfortable sentence.
And sometimes there are these big pileups where you can't tell where one girl begins and another one ends. And in the middle of that pileup will be you.
Especially when taken in context with how a lot of people interpret trans rights as merely allowing men to get close to women like that for that exact purpose, basically. Kind of makes you wonder if that prevailing attitude that American Dad is showcasing here might have had some larger influence upon the arguments and the debates that we're currently seeing occur across the world about whether trans people should get to publicly exist in the society that the cisgender binary created. Or if American Dad is merely just a reflection of an already existing attitude that led us to that point. There's also a little joke to end this scene that rubbed me a bit wrong. A joke about Steve crushing his balls and now he might not have to pretend to be a girl anymore. Which seems innocuous at first glance, but remember that such a joke does work into the biological essentialism that is at the core of a lot of transphobia and sexism. The idea that your body's alignment with a physical sex and the idea of it is what effectively defines your gender, and how that is a big deal and all the major way in which people interpret it. And almost immediately after me talking about the uncomfortable way in which Steve has been put into this team, we get to the first group meet before the match, where Steve is engaging in that timeless experience of taping your dick back to keep it tucked. Shout out to the drag queens out there for innovating in that field over the decades. We all owe you a lot. And also, him helping another female athlete to stretch out her leg in a very sexual pose and with very sexual noises, where he outright states this.
Come on, girl. Lean into it. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's the sweet spot.
Do you have any more of that tape?
Gross. Now, I don't like this at all, as what it is feels very akin to sexual harassment done under the guise of deception. To clearly emphasize to us, the audience, that Steve is getting sexual pleasure from doing this, and also that getting that sexual pleasure was his main reason for going into this idea in the first place, without the knowledge and consent of the women on the team, is nightmarish at best, and hard to view as just comedy. The next few scenes really lean into this more and more heavily, while at the same time also reiterating that whole concept of lesbian identity in regards to roller derby players, as it does seem like pretty much all of them are gay. And I guess that is just how straight people view sport, or women's sport. But as Stevie, is making the moves on Devon, one of the lesbian players on the team, Hayley drags him away to remind him that she will find out he is a guy, and then they will both get kicked off the team because, yeah, Hayley's found the problem here. That's the real problem. The problem is that they won't get to play roller derby anymore. Not the, I don't know, massively creepy factor of everything. It's like the show isn't even acknowledging or getting the problem with the scenario that it has set up. And I hope desperately that at least one woman in this episode will at least bring it up, preferably without immediately taking it down the turf pathway by making it an attack on trans women too. Steve and Hayley are the problem here. We've done nothing. Neither of them are trans people. Leave us out of this. I also don't like this bit here during the montage, where Steve breaks his promise to Hayley and ends up making out with Devon, as it shows all the roller derby women in a big pile-up being all sexual and gay and shit. Now, that might seem weird to you because anytime people are being gay, I'm normally on board. And how do I put this in an understandable way? There is a big interaction in media with regards to women-centric hobbies that align with masculinity that degrades them as not being viewed as a legitimate hobby that someone can be skilled at and can be dedicated towards, and instead turns it into a display for the appeal of the male gaze. Oh god, I said the buzzwords. I can already see the massive wave of online douche bros descending upon me to crush my little social justice channel. Jokes aside though, there is a common theme that women-on-women activity from any medium or industry will get transformed into being perceived as related to sexual or romantic entanglements that seem to appeal most of all to the invisible men in the audience. They're either being lesbian for the men to get off to, or are engaging in that to try and get men's attention. And in this regards, Steve is almost the insert for that audience, literally inserting themselves into this hobby and benefiting from the sexual nature of it. And while there are certainly times when men's sports gets a similar treatment and a similar dig made at it, jokes about how homoerotic the act of a bunch of sweaty men grabbing one another is, it doesn't happen quite as consistently or as visually erotically as media around women's sports does. The gags in this show really do give us quite an insight into something. Specifically, an insight into the generic way in which comedy has handled many of these tropes for decades, as American Dad rarely innovates with the jokes that it does, instead following a rather standardized pattern. And within that, I think you can really get a sense of how well established stereotypes and tropes were by virtue of how normalized it is for them to be included like this without any serious satirical stab made at them. Okay, I got distracted a little bit there. Hoping this whole ramble made sense to at least one person, let's get back on track and back on episodes. Hayley then proceeds to out Steve, during the big team meet before the final match, making especially sure that we know how important it is that Steve has a penis, and that is the real element that should see them removed from the team and part of their lying. Now, is Steve lying? Yes. This, as far as we are aware, is not a trans woman or a non-binary person who is living as themselves within the sport, but is a man pretending to be a woman and is almost using that to get closer to women. A fact that is true no matter how often Steve's femininity is illustrated by the show, But the outing scene is still quite an uncomfortable one. Haley literally pulls down his pants to reveal his taped up private areas, which is itself, I believe, sexual assault?
Because one of those hands is attached to a body that's attached to a penis! Stevie is a Steve.
Don't go around yoinking people's pants off, even if you suspect that they might be a devious man attempting to get their way into women's spaces. Can't believe I need to say that, but firstly, it doesn't prove anything about their intentions or their identity, and secondly, with the rise of TERFs and anti-trans shit, it seems to be becoming quite the recurring theme in the real world right now for this sort of harassment to happen. At this point, you might be thinking that American Dad is fucked. This is unrecoverable. And we've seen plenty of shows and movies that keep getting to this same point and pulling the trigger on the trans community with the result of these scenarios. But then this scene plays out.
I can't believe this.
Whoa, ladies, I can explain.
Not you. Her.
Me? But he's a boy!
We know.
You do? Did you know?
Of course I did.
American Dad acknowledges that trans women exist. This team of lesbians has no problem with their existence, and can recognise that the outside is not what makes a woman a woman. They can't believe that Haley would do such a thing, especially to their own sibling. Obviously, Steve is taken aback by this because as far as he is aware, and has been told, his biological makeup and his sexuality is the defining element that determines his gender identity. But as the roller derby team explains, such a thing is not necessarily true.
But having a penis doesn't make him a boy.
It doesn't?
Are you positive?
Obviously, Stevie is a girl trapped in a boy's body.
But that can't be. I like girls.
We all like girls, Stevie.
Steve has been feeling more and more comfortable recently doing all these things with the team, and with pretending to be a woman. So, what does that mean then? Steve understandably roller skates away at this, needing time to process all this new information that would absolutely require some introspection about oneself and how one perceives one. Haley, on the other hand, gets told off by the team and kicked off the team for pulling down somebody's pants to reveal their genitalia, which is made very clear by them, not okay.
Why?
You just pull someone's pants down to expose their genitals.
We live in a post-genital society, Haley.
I agree. I mean, I've never heard that phrase, but I'm one of you.
No, you're not.
I'm sorry, but right now I'm having my mind blown by an animated sitcom from Seth MacFarlane, which is repeating the same point I wanted made clear within it. What the fuck is going on? I think this must be what it feels like to be on Pranked, because the world seems wrong and I don't know why. And it's weird that it's wrong because this is how it should be handled. Like, something seems off about a show doing the right thing, and that just seems all kinds of messed up. There is also some commentary in here about Haley's fake progressive attitude, something that the show uses a lot. How her constant attempts to remind people that she is pro all the leftist stuff is more of a rebellion against her Republican father than a legitimate way in which she perceives and interacts with the world. We also see Roger dealing with rats in the background, a continuation of their joke in the episode, which I've not gone into at all because this one isn't about them, okay? I just wanted to stop here briefly because of the rats. I love rats. Look at those little guys with the little noses. I love rats so much. That's another piece of Lily Cannon for you, so write it up, Wikipedia.
Get! I said get!
I'm going, okay?
Hiya!
Before we continue with the next 6 minutes of the episode and wrap this up, I want to make a brief stop to talk about that scene which we just dealt with. Now, the episode could absolutely tank the goodwill generated here, but before that happens, I want to consider how surprising it is that such a scene happened. While you might be thinking that of course this is in 2015, right around the initial mainstream surge of trans identity, spearheaded specifically by Laverne Cox, And so, of course, it would handle trans identity and trans topics better than an animated show or sitcom from the early 2000s. And with that, I want to remind you that quite a few of the shows that we have discussed had trans jokes or trans episodes either around the same time as this American Dad one, or even later. The Simpsons, Arrested Development, Big Bang Theory, Family Guy, each one were doing trans jokes or trans narratives at a similar point, and none of them handled it as well or as concisely as American Dad has done here. And digging into it, I don't know what was done especially differently. I can't find any trans people involved in the creative process, whether at an acting, directing or writing level, and it just seems as if this was a case of cis people having done some research and some effort to engage with the community's rather extensive selection of literary works and interviews talking about our lives and our perceptions on the world, as well as the larger queer community's engagement with trans identities, especially in spaces like this roller derby, which is clearly LGBTQ-led. I'd advise reading Julia Serrano or Janet Mock or Judith Butler myself if you are a cis person making a trans character who wants to try and get it right, but doesn't have any trans people to talk to. But with that aside done, let's get back to the episode. Steve and Haley have a confrontation, as Haley is clearly shown to be still very self-centered in her perspective on what is happening, taking literally the entire last scene and boiling it down to, am I the close-minded one? While Steve is understandably still roiling from the revelation that he could be a girl in a guy's body.
My head is spinning.
I know. I'm in shock. Am I really close-minded?
What? Who cares? I'm a girl in a boy's body!
Also, some of you might be starting to realise that earlier in this analysis, I kept making it clear that such a thing did not happen with Steve's femininity in the show, and that's because I tricked you. I wanted those who have never seen it to get as shocked as I did upon first viewing, so hopefully you can excuse the deception. These themes, though, share more similarities than you might expect, as it's both our main characters attempting to come to terms with new information that changes their perspective on themselves, as is helpfully told to us via song. I think I forgot to mention, American Dad does a lot of musical numbers, even when there is not a musical guest involved in the episode. This isn't just a gay episode thing. I like it. This song is pretty decent, and the jokes in it are rather funny. Especially the way that Haley talks a bunch about her troubles, and then Steve just jumps in with, I thought I was a boy.
Acceptance was my creed, but now I find it. I've been a fool indeed.
I thought I was a boy.
If anything, I think it just proves that more shows need to put in musical bits, because musicals are the best. And no, that's not just me saying that because I'm gay. All of this leads us to our conclusionary scene, wherein Haley apologises to Steve about making assumptions over their gender identity, and then Roger descends from the heavens on a spinning disco ball, and yes, okay, Roger gets to be part of the episode and part of the conversation. There truly cannot be a queer episode in American Dad without their insertion somewhere, I guess.
Is somebody sexually confused? I was above you. I was above you the whole time.
But it does make sense that if anyone was going to be the person who actually helped Steve understand their gender and connect with who they are, it would be Roger. Certainly a wealth of experience, and not the worst message for any questioning people out there, namely, hey, go find the queerest person you know and get some insight from them on how to proceed. Although, as you might be able to see, Roger is possibly not a good choice at all, and you could probably find a better elder queer person to help you out if you're starting your journey. So, the message is good, the person is a bad example of that. And Roger gets them to do dress up, to see if such a thing sparks any euphoria in Steve, which he certainly seems to find appealing, and to enjoy the way that it accentuates certain curves.
I'm not feeling it. It's like the dress is wearing me.
Pair it with some kitten heels.
Well, I can't argue with the lines this creates.
Although Roger's insistence that any sign from Steve that he enjoys this stuff means that he must cut his penis off does kinda go directly against the entire point made by the roller derby team, and the episode itself to this point almost, which is that your body doesn't determine your gender identity. Honestly, like I said before, Roger isn't the best source. They certainly have the experience, but they seem to be very pushy with a specific kind of trans identity and transitioning. Steve then realises that they are fine with their penis, and that they are a boy because they jerk off to a woman on a bottle, and yet again, it does feel like American Dad is missing the exact point that American Dad brought up.
And then I saw the sexy lady on the shampoo bottle, and I realized it felt right to have this penis. It felt right 5 times.
A real case of crossed wires, or perhaps different writers writing different parts. I don't know which. And so Steve has to tell the team that he isn't trans, and that he is a boy in a boy's body. Though, yet again, what is a boy's body except for a body claimed by a boy? And the team is accepting of that, and is proud of him for figuring out who he is, much to the chagrin of Haley, who tries to shame them because her connection with progressiveness is built more on being better than others than on actually being accepting. And that's the episode.
Shame! Shame on all your houses!
I was just gonna say that I'm happy for him.
Damn it!
Now, we've got a lot of work to do here, wrapping up these disparate threads to really nail down whether American Dad did a good trans narrative or not. And I think what I would say is that it's a mixed bag that leans more in the positive direction. Yes, there are certainly positive elements in here that I've already laid out. The queer characters, regardless of how awkwardly their queerness is interpreted, almost like some kind of straight cis stereotype of a queer character, well, they at least present a well-stated and reasoned view on trans theory that incorporates many of the elements that have recently become a big deal in the discussion, specifically around the nature of accepting a person's journey as being important to them, and that a body or sexuality does not define a person's gender identity. There's no attack on trans people here. There's no mockery of them for existing. Admittedly, they don't technically exist in this episode, but there was certainly plenty of opportunities to include some real transphobic jokes or transphobic talking points, and American Dad managed to navigate around that. But at the same time, the landing for the episode's narrative doesn't really stick it on those points, with the follow-up of Steve exploring their gender identity being kinda relegated to a very brief series of scenes involving Roger, that wraps itself up super fast and focuses on the idea of getting rid of the penis, and that Steve grew to understand that they were a guy by virtue of having a penis and wanting to use that penis to get off to women, things which the queer roller derby people literally just told us were not essential to being a woman. It's meant to be about how what you feel inside is what counts, and yet Steve's conclusion is about what's on the outside almost. What it most feels like is that this show has 20 minutes basically to do a whole plot line, and therefore, when they looked at the length of the script and realised that they had 4 of those minutes to quickly make it clear that Steve wasn't a trans person, and so they could do something completely different next week with no serious character alterations, they just sort of rushed their way to a conclusion that maintained the sitcom status quo that personally I find more of a curse than a boon to the format. It just comes across as poor planning and time management. 2 things that every teacher I've ever had have also accused me of, so trust me when I say that I can really recognise it when I see it. At the end of the day, that's sort of what we got here. A rushed and distant perspective of the trans community, relayed about us from a detached viewpoint, and with narier consideration of any larger implications in it. While it is certainly far better than the worst shows that I have reviewed, and I would put it at above the middle of the pack for the genre it is in, it's still nowhere near as good as it could be or could have been. Better is always a possibility, and mediocrity or neutral inclusions that lean more positive than insulting should be the baseline for trans inclusion, not the goal. And that's that. Hopefully you liked what I said here, or learned something from it, or at least watched this video without ad blocks so I can get those sweet, sweet dollars to blow on Magic the Gathering cards and food. If you really did like this video, then please like, share, subscribe and comment. It all helps a lot to remind YouTube that I exist, and that maybe more people should watch this stuff. If you really want to help the channel, the best way of doing that is hacking into your local news station or military intelligence base and streaming all my videos for them. I've heard they love that shit. Oh, I guess you could also go to my Patreon and subscribe there, or subscribe here as a member on YouTube. The names of all those in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I really do appreciate each and every one of them. Especially right now, because I'm getting booted out of this place in a month's time, so I have to look for a new place to rent, while also trying to get money to buy a new PC, mic and camera. That's right, I am actually trying to upgrade the quality of these videos. Who knows, maybe I'll even get a proper backdrop in my next place, with like a bookshelf, and like a nice seat that doesn't creak all the time, and some more posters, because this one is dying. It's been like 3 or 4 years and it's not having a good time. All of this depends on how much money I can spend on it, really. At the very least, I would just love to get somewhere with non-fucked up walls covered in damaged wallpaper, which is what that is. It's not a spot on my wall or some gunk or something, it's just the wallpaper it's come off, okay? And that is everywhere in this room. Other than all of that, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a great day.